can go home and be free again. He's right. The terrible crimes and tortures committed by Saddam's henchmen against the innocent people of Kuwait are an affront to mankind and a challenge to the freedom of all. Listen to one of our great officers out there, Marine Lieutenant General Walter Boomer. He said, there are things worth fighting for. A world in which brutality and lawlessness are allowed to go unchecked isn't the kind of world we're going to want to live in. Listen to Master Sergeant J.P. Kendall of the 82nd Airborne. We're here for more than just the price of a gallon of gas. What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now. And finally, we should all sit up and listen to Jackie Jones, an Army lieutenant, when she says, if we let him get away with this, who knows what's going to be next? I've called upon Hollywood and Walter and J.P. and Jackie and all their courageous comrades in arms to do what must be done. Tonight, America and the world are deeply, deeply grateful to them and to their families. And let me say to everyone listening or watching tonight, when the troops we've sent in finish their work, I'm determined to bring them home as soon as possible. Tonight, as our forces fight, they and their families are in our prayers. May God bless each and every one of them and the coalition forces at our side in the Gulf, and may he continue to bless our nation, the United States of America.
President George Bush, speaking from the Oval Office in the White House, concluding about 35 minutes ago, talking about Operation Desert Storm, which began shortly before 7 o'clock New York time. So far, it appears everything is going the President's way. We are getting no reports of American casualties or aircraft lost in the Persian Gulf region. Israeli military sources report now that the American airstrikes have neutralized Iraqi Scud missile installations in western Iraq that were aimed at Israel. You'll recall that Saddam Hussein had threatened to attack Israel if, in fact, he were attacked. So far, that hasn't happened, and if those missile batteries, in fact, have been neutralized and the chemical weapons plants and sites have been neutralized, the chances of him being able to launch any kind of an attack against Israel, needless to say, are greatly diminished. Dr. Norman Friedman is a weapons analyst who is conversant in the specific data concerning all these weapons systems. Scud missiles, how big a threat were they, and how big a break is this for the West if, in fact, they've taken these batteries out?
Well, there was always an interesting question about Scud. The question was whether the Iraqis had made a chemical warhead for it. That's not a trivial job. They had not used such things in the Iran-Iraq war. If they had failed to make such a warhead, and many people believe they had failed, then the danger is it's about a 500-pound bomb. It's very difficult to shoot down, so if you're within 20 or 30 feet of it, you've had it. If you're not within 20 or 30 feet, it doesn't really matter much. If he had a chemical weapon, that's a much nastier proposition. Now, he strongly implied that he had chemical warheads because it was very good PR for him. There was always a certain skepticism. It's not a terribly accurate weapon. You couldn't use it to destroy, let's say, a corner of an airfield because it had an accuracy of something like 5 miles. It was the most futuristic weapon he had, and so in order to be sure, anyone attacking him would want to put it out of business, and it looks like it was done.
No, well, let me just jump in here. CNN is reporting that a couple of Scud missile sites in western Iraq that were aimed at Israel. They're nicknamed H2 and H3. Maybe that means something to you,
no.
I don't know. Anyway, CNN is reporting that they have been wiped out.
Well, that would have been among the most important targets because of the fear that, in fact, he did have chemical weapons there.
What happens in the morning now? So far, we have gotten nothing in the way of a response, apparently, out of Saddam Hussein. Are you surprised by that fact that 3 or 4 hours into this thing, he has not been able to mount any kind of a counteroffensive? And what would you look for in the morning when daylight comes?
Well, remember first that his night capability was always very limited. Most of his aircraft are no good at night. His Air Force never flew much at night.
Is his Air Force any good during the day?
It wasn't that great during the Iran-Iraq war, day or night. Now, the question is, did we hit the airfields? If we hit the airfields, how much was destroyed? it's possible there's no Iraqi Air Force left, in which case, during the day, his troops will be trying to arrange themselves so they won't be hit again tomorrow night. It's also possible that so much damage was done to his air defenses that we'll just keep bombing him during the day because he won't be able to do much about it. You obviously saw some kind of very good coordinated strike that destroyed a great deal of what he had to put up against air attacks. And if we're going to rely heavily on air, then that would be the first thing we would do. Now, if we hear that some of his Air Force gets off in the morning and starts making strikes in Saudi Arabia, then you'll know that we didn't destroy the whole thing. It's not that easy to destroy a whole Air Force. It's not that hard sometimes. It depends how it's arranged. It also depends just how good his pilots are. Remember that the airfields in Saudi Arabia are defended by our anti-aircraft missiles. Those are not bad missiles, and it's conceivable his pilots won't really have much appetite for it.
Best case scenario, how long might it take to subdue him? Best case.
Well, best case, everything folds within a week. It folds within a week because his army is totally demoralized. The Republican divisions decide that they've had it. The army on the border, which is not the highest quality, basically becomes so demoralized that it folds under attack. We smash our way through the barriers that have been put up with heavy bombing raids. We walk in and the troops just come out and surrender. That's best case. That's total demoralization. They've never been under extremely heavy air attack in their lives. Those things are absolutely terrible.
Well, let me just ask Dr. Mehdi, who has joined us. You saw him earlier with Christopher Jones. Dr. Mehdi, I've known you now for 21 years, and during all that time you have worked tirelessly to improve American-Arab relations. But tonight, you've got Arab against Arab. The Saudi Arabians, the Kuwaiti Air Force has joined in this fight against Iraq. How does that make you feel?
I am very unhappy, and of course even more unhappy that Arabs are killing Arabs, is that America has made this decision which is really to the detriment of America on the long run. I do hope, I pray that Saddam, whatever he can do, not to retaliate. That will reduce both the death of American soldiers and the death of the Iraqis. I hope that Saddam would not retaliate. But then war is more than a military operation. America may succeed militarily and lose politically, morally throughout the Arab world, Muslim world.
Something that remains to be seen. All right, we are going to take a break, and we will be back in just a moment or so with more on what has become Operation Desert Storm. As we continue our coverage on this night of war that the President hopes will be the start of a new peaceful era in the world, we've heard from the President on why he felt he just couldn't wait any longer. Well, he said Saddam Hussein was pillaging Kuwait and building up stockpiles of chemical weapons, even the start of nuclear weapons. No American ground forces are involved at this point, as far as we know, only air power. And we've just heard from the Pentagon that so far reports of any casualties are very encouraging. Things are going as planned. There were reports that Iraq managed to fire 5 of its missiles into Saudi Arabia, but the Pentagon hasn't confirmed that. And Israel is hoping that any Iraqi missiles pointed in their direction were hit on the ground before they could be launched or even fueled up, and the word is that they were. There were 2 missile sites in western Iraq aimed right at Israel. You remember that Saddam Hussein had said that was going to be his first target. Apparently those missile sites have been wiped out. CNN reporters in Baghdad said there was no bombing immediately around their hotel, but they could see the Iraqi anti-aircraft fire trying to hit the American bombers. Planes obviously that were flying too high, along with perhaps missiles coming in, and of course all the ships that we have offshore firing into that part of the Baghdad also. Patrick McGrath is standing by now at the White House. We are going to go to him now for the very latest on what is going on in this war.
Saddam Hussein could not say he had no warning. For 5.5 months, President Bush and the entire world warned him to get out of Kuwait. It was a month and a half ago that the United Nations passed its resolution warning that force would be used if Saddam did not get out of Kuwait. But Saddam Hussein did not take those warnings seriously. So tonight, Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. And in a speech tonight in the Oval Office, President Bush said the attack is going according to plan.
5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. The 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force, we will not fail. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. Initial reports from General Schwarzkopf are that our operations are proceeding according to plan. Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. I prefer to think of peace, not war. I am convinced not only that we will prevail, but that out of the horror of combat will come the recognition that no nation can stand against a world united. No nation will be permitted to brutally assault its neighbor.
The president's speech was not heavy on facts. That's because the battle is young and not a lot of information is available at this time. He expressed the belief that the U.S. will win and that they will destroy Saddam's military capability, but nowhere tonight did he express the opinion that he actually declare victory. And it's clear that there is still a good lot of fighting still ahead. For more on that, let's go now to the Pentagon, where Brian Wilson is standing by. Brian?
Apologize. We apparently had some problems with Brian's audio. We'll try to go back to him later on. After all, this is live TV. Christopher Jones is standing by at the UN, where he has been all night, where many diplomats were caught off guard by the war action. Chris?
Well, of course, it's been a very busy time here, Cora, and but I must say, yesterday, when the United Nations ran out of words, that was as good advice to Saddam Hussein that the bullets were going to fly as anything. And perhaps what sealed his fate were two remarks. One was from the president of France, Francois Mitterrand, who said, "We're now through with the words, now guns will do the talking." And the other was a comment that the Secretary General made when he returned from his failed peace mission to Baghdad. He said he felt he had been abused by Saddam Hussein. That galvanized international feeling in a way, something that no one here has seen before. And just about an hour and a half ago, the Secretary General emerged from this building and had these comments about the outbreak of war.
After all my efforts, after all the efforts of so many countries and so many personalities, that we are now facing a war. And then at this very moment, only 1 hour and a half after the hostilities, I am not well informed. I have not lot of details about what has happened. But I think it's for me to express my deep sorrow because of as Secretary General of the United Nations, the peace organization, I can only be saddened by the beginning of hostilities.
As President Bush took pains to point out in his speech this evening, this is not just an American operation. It is a 28-nation affair, but you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realize this is fundamentally an American responsibility. It's mainly our troops out there, ours who are going to be called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice. We hope not in too many numbers. Generally right now here at the United Nations, however, they're still trying to talk and find a way to get out of this with a ceasefire and with Saddam complying with the UN resolutions which started this whole thing. Meanwhile, as we speak, there are demonstrators approaching the building. They are reputed to be in numbers of around 500. We don't know exactly the numbers. There are police in large numbers here. There are fortifications in front of the U.S. mission directly across the street from the United Nations. And there are warnings of terrorism from usually well-informed sources. We hope in this case they are wrong. Christopher Jones, Fox News at the United Nations. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Corinne?
And John, there are reports that Israel had advance warning of when the bombing would start. An Army officer there says Iraqi missiles that were aimed at Israel were wiped out in the U.S. air attack. The country is on high alert. The military ordered its citizens to stay indoors and to prepare their gas masks in case of an Iraqi attack. Iraq has vowed to make Israel its first target in case of war, and Saddam threatened to scorch the country with chemical weapons.
All right, Corinne, there are 3 CNN reporters right in the middle of this. They're in a hotel in downtown Baghdad, and they've been listening to what's been going on ever since it started tonight at about 7. We are going to take a listen now to something that we recorded from them a little bit earlier in the evening.
We have listened to the president's address, and as he indicated in speaking, or while speaking, hostilities were going on, and indeed, we could see far off in the distance lights flashing. We could hear the bombs, and we could see the tracer fire from the anti-aircraft batteries. As I listened to President Bush tonight, it seemed to me that he was telling Saddam Hussein, you are going to quit Kuwait. But I also heard Peter Arnett and John Holloman an implied threat to this man that the forces have gone against the nuclear plant that was a building. The forces have gone against the chemical arsenals. But I heard the president saying that we might not stop here. He did declare that this was not an invasion of Iraq. He wants to cripple this man's military capability. I should also tell you that we do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment, nor do we know where other members of his government are located. I'm going to pass the microphone around because each of my colleagues has something to contribute. John Holloman.
Bernie, I think you're right about the president's message to President Saddam Hussein. It's a message of, this is it. This is the beginning of what we're going to do. I'm sure the president would like very much if President Hussein would respond right away by, offering to pull out of Kuwait or something, but we'll have to wait and see what he's going to do later on. The last time we saw President Saddam Hussein was on television tonight in video that we know was at least a day old from a tour that he made of Kuwait. Excuse me. I'm now looking out the window of our bureau here, and I can tell you that off in the distance there continues to be the sounds of what appear to me to be bombs. During the president's message, there were flashes of light from a distance probably as much as 15 or 20 miles away, probably to the south of where we are. And at this moment, there are no signs of anti-aircraft fire in the downtown Baghdad area, but there continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflection.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs, punctuating President Bush's speech of his reference to Vietnam. This will not be another Vietnam. And I was thinking back to Vietnam, where I spent many years, to a similar raid in 1972, a B-52 strike on Hanoi. The interesting thing was that raid came at the end of the Vietnam War, near the end of the Vietnam War, and many say it helped end that war. This raid on Baghdad and elsewhere in this region tonight is at the beginning of this war, and maybe it certainly won't be a Vietnam. John?
Peter, while you were speaking, the sky lit up again with some more apparently chaff to fool Iraqi radar in the sky. There are bunches of groups of white lights and yellow lights that go through the sky and then blink out mysteriously, apparently designed to confuse the anti-aircraft guns. And at this point, the anti-aircraft guns are not firing, so if they're intended to confuse, they are not, the guns are not firing. Well, as I speak, off in the distance, I see some anti-aircraft fire is going up pretty far away from our location, and you might be able in the background to hear some of that out the window. Yeah, Bernie Shaw is back again, and then we want to talk to someone who's just come up from the shelters downstairs who will brief our loved ones about how things are there. Bernie.
Yes, I was just, Ingrid has been sitting here on the floor. I don't know how you managed to get past those guards and make that long hike up those 14 stories that I made about an hour ago. But what is the situation in the bomb shelter? And Ingrid, you know all of the members of the press corps, the other American networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, they've been highly concerned about their people. So take your time now and give us a fill on what the situation is in the bomb shelter.
Well, what you can see from up here, you can hear down in the shelter is low, very low and quiet sounds. There was a little bit of confusion at the beginning. The press went down there, other hotel guests, hotel employees who also live in a compound nearby. A number of mothers and their children at a certain time, perhaps half an hour after the attack started, you heard chants of down, down, Bush, so we even had a little demonstration down in the shelter. The interesting thing was that some of the government guys that accompany us during the day when we try and work, and some of the hotel security people are walking around with Kalashnikovs and gas masks, which is something that was a little bit of a surprise to see. And I did see a lot of our colleagues down there, some of them who had been up on higher floors taking pictures, and they were taken by security people downstairs to a shelter, ostensibly for our own protection.
All right, let me tell you two things now that we have just learned. Israeli officials are now saying, Israeli military officials are now saying that any threat from Iraq on Israel has been greatly diminished. And we've also learned that the first wave of the planes has returned back to the base in Bahrain in Saudi Arabia, not one single casualty. And as soon as word of the war began, oil prices took off. The markets here were closed, but there was cash trading behind closed doors. They shot up to about $40 a barrel, but then they fell back to about $37. And now some oil companies in our country have frozen the price of gasoline, Conoco, Mobil, and Chevron. One would have to think that if those three did it, the others would follow suit. Wall Street had closed for the day by the time the first American attacks took place. But there was some pretty bad news about our economy in general. The consumer price index jumped in December 0.3%, and that pushed the inflation rate for all of 1990 to 6.1%. That's the worst jump in 9 years. The Dow finished up 18 points. Winners beat the losers. Shares on the New York Exchange averaged about 22 cents increase, and the American shares were up 4 cents. Gloria?
And John, talk of war, as we all know, has been going on for months, but somehow the decision to attack Iraq is still a little bit shocking. Penny Crone is in Greenwich Village with a reaction from some New Yorkers. Penny?
Corian, throughout the night we have been driving around Greenwich Village. We've been talking with people, and clearly everyone tonight that we've talked with, they're introspective, they're quiet, and yet they're not depressed. That's the feeling we've gotten throughout this area. This area is very quiet, and usually Greenwich Village is one of the most bustling places in the city. Just a few minutes ago, President Bush went on the air. He gave his statement, and a lot of people throughout the city and the world were watching, just like they were watching here in Greenwich Village. Everyone's eyes were glued to the giant TV screens, both outside and in. And you could almost hear a pin drop moments before President Bush began his 12-minute speech.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait.
When it was over, almost everyone had thoughts about what they had just heard.
I agree with a lot of what he was saying, but it really doesn't give us many answers. I hope everyone can come home soon. I hope it's over soon.
How about you, sir?
Well, my reaction is that although I'm not in favor of war and the loss of life, I feel that we waited long enough and we suffered a lot of what Hussein has done to not only his people, but other people who have become victims of what he's done. And we had to do what we have to do.
I really didn't expect this to happen. My younger brother's over there. He's on the aircraft carrier, the USS Midway, which is right in the middle of things. And I was really concerned. As far as the speech goes, I think it really hit home. I agree with the whole purpose of everything going on over there. And I hope everybody is, I hope they come home safe and sound and as soon as possible.
He seemed to be pretty confident in what he's doing. I'm confident as well. I think we're doing the right thing, and hopefully it'll be over as soon as possible.
Now, as you just heard just a couple of seconds ago, Mike Schenberg was one of the men we were speaking with, and he just said his brother is in the Middle East, right in the middle of the action. And just to expand a little bit on your thoughts, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling right now, Mike?
Well, when I first heard it, I was totally shocked. I was watching it in my hotel room, and when I saw it on the television, I just started shaking because I hadn't heard from him for about a couple months now, really for about a year. Last time I heard from him was Christmas Eve, and I'm really concerned. He's not doing anything overly out in the open. He doesn't fly or he's not on deck or anything. He's down below. But I'm still really concerned for him, and he's the baby of the house. He's 21. He just turned 21 in December, and I'm sure all of our families just really feeling for him at the moment.
Mike, I have to ask you this. Was he in the reserves or was he in active duty? And what was your family's thoughts when he either joined the reserves or active duty?
He joined up on by himself, volunteered all the way right after he got out of high school. He went to it on his own with no coaxing from anybody. He wanted to do something for his country and for himself to, you know, serve his country the best way he knows how, and he likes it. He knows he's doing a good job, and he's pleased with, you know, the ship and all that.
If you could say something, I know you're from St. Louis, to your family and your brother, what is his name?
Bobby.
Could you say something to Bobby right now if he could hear you and all the other servicemen over there? What do you have to say, Mike?
Stay cool, Bob, and hi to the Wild Bunch in Main 3.
Okay, thank you very much, and we wish your family and clearly Bob and all our men over there good luck. We'll try to get back to you later. I'm Penny Crone reporting live from Greenwich Village. Now back to the studio.
All right, Penny. Yesterday there was a demonstration at Columbia University. Students and some activists gathered to call for peace in the Gulf. Tonight, young people at Columbia, people across the country coping with the reality of war now and how it might touch their lives. Amy Atkins reports.
It's been said nearly every generation in America has been touched by war. This generation was to be an exception. But that innocence was shattered with news of a massive air attack.
There are bullets being fired up into the air. You can see tracers along with other bullets going up into the air.
Phil Busey's brother is in the 82nd Airborne.
I knew he was right in the thick of it, you know, as soon as it started, and I was just, you know, I just can hope the best for him, you know. I try really not to think about it, try to think about my brother right now.
Columbia University students watch the news with a fixed gaze, trying to absorb the shock and make sense of it all.
What goes through my mind is the injustice, to tell you the truth, of the war right now. There are acts of violence all around the world that are condoned by the administration, and yet, in the case of the Gulf, they've chosen to make a stand.
Elizabeth DeRider wasn't surprised at all. She's a poli-sci major with a concentration in Mideast studies.
Feeling about the United States government the way that I do, and feeling about the Middle East the way that I do, it's hard to go either way on it. Kind of stuck in the middle right now.
If the war in the Middle East is not a short one, the government could run out of volunteers to serve. And there's a sinking feeling here, if there is a draft, these guys could be next.
I was just wondering, like, as a college student, I think it's a major concern is how this will affect us and, like, our continuing education if they can draft us out of school.
To know that, you know, there's a possibility that they could institute a draft and we could be, you know, sent over there to fight. Yeah, that does scare me.
From Columbia University, Amy Atkins, Fox News, Channel 5.
All right, Professor David Danoon has joined us now. He is at NYU now. He used to be with the Defense Department, assistant deputy there. David, now that we know pretty much, to a certain extent anyway, what's happened up to this point, what happens next?
Well, I think we really need to find out what the reports are tomorrow in terms of the damage that was done. To the extent that the Air Force has been decimated, to the extent that the communications facilities have already been knocked down partly, then I think we'll go broader in terms of knocking out things like power facilities, supply depots, and so on. Obviously, at some point, we want Saddam to surrender and to say that he's going to pull out of Kuwait. That's the objective, and I think we'll have to see how quickly he does it.
Well, if he didn't do it then, you really think he will do it now?
It depends. It depends how much he's suffering, and it also depends what kind of pressure he comes under from his own people. There also may be a coup against him.
It would be difficult to believe, and forgive me for asking this again, but if this man didn't give up when he saw everything in front of him that was there, if he didn't believe it then, even though we, from all reports, knocking the heck out of him and his troops, he's still he's probably in a bunker somewhere down 20 feet or 50 feet below the ground. He's probably, nobody's touching him.
Well, but you have to remember that if thousands of his own people are dying, which could happen.
But these are the same people he used poison gas against.
Yes, but there's going to be a different reaction, I think, this time because of the speed of it and the simultaneity of it. I think that's going to be the difference. This time he's going to get reports from all over the country of what's happening. They're all going to be coming into Baghdad, and obviously the intent is to try to affect his behavior.
Okay, we're going to break in again, and once again we are going to go to the gentlemen who were in that hotel in downtown Baghdad, the three reporters for CNN.
And moving about as we sought to observe and to report to you. We're well. All of us are, of course, exhausted. Our energy levels are way off the register, and that's the way it feels right now. Let me be quiet to listen for a question from you, and also tell you that Peter Arnett and John Holloman are here, and each will have something to say very shortly.
Yes, Bernie, it's near daylight now. Are you able to see any of the damage caused by what the Pentagon is telling us were strategic and pinpoint bombings?
Well, I can certainly vouch for that, and Peter Arnett will be able to stitch together some images in just a second. How does it feel to be at ground zero when a massive aerial campaign, unprecedented in military history, is unfolding around you? The only thing I can think of is that it's comparable to being at Cape Kennedy and feeling the ground rumble, the thunder, and seeing that huge shuttle with its booster rockets taking off and hearing the thunder. Only in this instance, in reality, here in Baghdad, you heard it sporadically. Bright lights. It was quite an experience to feel it, to see it, to think about it, to think about what it means and why it was happening, and, of course, to report it. I'm going to yield here now to Peter Arnett and John Holloman.
Yes, Peter.
Hello, Lou. Peter Arnett here.
Hi.
Just a small observation. It has to be pretty unique in journalistic history to have a front row seat to one of the great air bombardments of history. I'd just like to point out that these are just the first shots in this war, and there are no indications yet, we may have them later in the day, how Saddam Hussein feels about it, but he has a 1 million-man strong army. He said he will fight on with the cry, Allahu Akbar, God is great. And these are the first shots, and from this vantage point in Baghdad, we'll be interested to see how these events unfold from here. I'd like to hand you to John Holloman now.
Lou, what I'm going to do for you is look out the window and tell you what I see, and something I do pretty well. I'll tell you, about 3 hours ago, the sky was brightly lighted with the tracer rounds from the anti-aircraft guns. Right now, the early morning fog that has inhabited Baghdad each early morning for the past several days is beginning to roll back in. But out on the 8-lane highway, which runs in front of our hotel, there are signs of early morning traffic. We've reported to you for many months that the society in Iraq is very well organized, and despite the fact that there was a major air attack here just a few hours ago, the morning commuter buses that are supposed to take off and drive down to the downtown bus station at this hour are on the road, and they're driving down to the bus station. As Bernie reported, we saw a hook and ladder fire truck go by, I guess about 10 or 15 minutes ago. We've also heard some small arms fire out the window in the past few minutes, but no sign of the conflagration in the skies that we reported to you on a few hours back. Downtown Baghdad really looks pretty calm right now, and the events of 3 hours ago seem to fade into memory. Bernie?
Thanks, John. We have a brother of the profession here, Don Kirk of USA Today, and this is our first eyewitness account from somebody who was outside where we've been reporting from. Don, how did you manage to make it back from the American Embassy to here?
I just drove back in the same taxi that took me to the embassy. He hadn't gotten his fare yet, so he wanted to get a full fare, so he took me back through darkened streets. There was tracer fire all over the sky on both sides of the river, but the streets were dark and calm and somewhat eerie, and there was no sign of bombing or bomb damage in the center of the city through which I drove, which doesn't mean to say that something didn't fall while I was still at the embassy. The reason I was at the American Embassy, incidentally, was that I had an open phone line to USA Today when the anti-aircraft fire began going off. I called them once more, and the line went down moments later, leaving me with no way to communicate. I came back here, and the first thing that happened to me was that they put me in the bomb shelter along with a whole lot of other journalists who were stuck down there. I managed to sort of exfiltrate my way out and up to where I am now through a back stairs.
As you were driving back in your taxi, Don Kirk of USA Today, what were you able to see on the streets in terms of people?
There were no people on the streets. There were some cars on the streets. My driver wanted to drive with his lights out, running the risk of a rather serious accident. I persuaded him to put his dim lights on from time to time, We passed some other cars, some with dim lights on, some totally dark. There were no people on the streets, and incidentally, there were no signs of military on the streets. I did see some police cars go roaring by, and a couple of taxis madly dashing through the night, but that was about it.
John, any signs of damage from this attack anywhere between here and the U.S. Embassy?
I didn't see a single sign of damage, and I might add that I went a route that took me by the presidential palace. Now, for all I know, the palace was not even there when I went by it, but the place was totally dark and silent as I went by. From the embassy, there was AAA anti-aircraft artillery going off around the embassy and around the palace very heavily with tracer bullets of differing colors all over the place. I heard a couple of thunderous explosions, which I guess you guys heard too, which was...
We not only heard them, we felt them. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney has confirmed that they were going after strategic targets and such things as command control centers, anti-aircraft batteries. The intention, according to the Pentagon, was to blind Saddam Hussein and to cut him off from being able to communicate with his troops to the south of here.
Well, certainly there's no communication. There's no local telephone at this point. You can't even call another room where we are, and there's no communication overseas. Telexes are out, phones are out, and this means here is about the only one that I know, which is one reason why I happen to join you here.
Well, it's good to have you, brother. We're glad you're safe, and if the people at USA Today are listening, he looks quite safe to me, just a little bit winded. You have to go 14 stories high to get up here to the CNN broadcast position. Let me pause for a moment just in case our colleagues along the way have something to ask us or if they want to go somewhere else.
No, nothing here, Bernie. We're fascinated by what you have to say there.
Okay, we will... is that switch correct, John? I think we will continue here as a very satisfied Don Kirk makes his way out of our place. John, we're going to be able to see a little bit better here now very, very shortly. That's encouraging.
That's right, Bernie. Don Kirk, as you just pointed out, didn't see any signs of damage. And if what Secretary Cheney wanted the Pentagon to do was what it did and do surgical bombing, then perhaps we won't see much damage to the infrastructure here in downtown Baghdad. We can begin to see out to the horizon now, and you can see more and more cars with their lights on as we go along here.
I just have a reaction, a comment to make to what you were saying about Defense Secretary Cheney and surgical bombing. Very simply put, if this was surgical bombing, I don't like being this close to the operating table.
Bernie, good thought. I'll tell you, I can just describe what I see on the streets to you. Again, there's a large truck, not an 18-wheeler, but looks like the kind of truck you'd rent in the United States to move some things from one place to another. It's going down the street. There's some sort of fire of some kind that we just heard out the window. It sounded like large caliber weapons fire, but we don't see any sign of it because out here the fog gets thicker and thicker. Bernie?
One observation. When we first came up on the air and we were reporting the first seconds of the attack, the first raid coming in, we heard a lot of small arms fire around the streets. And as we have been reporting throughout the night, as the F-15s, 16s came in, you don't see them, you hear them. You hear them after they are gone. And imagine, if you will, a plane swooping in low, going toward its target, and then passing you by, going so fast, and then seeing tracers from the anti-aircraft batteries. There was no match, but apparently the civilian militias and these young boys, 15 and older, who were issued these Soviet machine guns and hand weapons, they were just firing into the air as they realized the battle was on.
Yeah, there were some reports, Bernie, you'll remember a couple of months ago, that said one of the Iraqi defensive strategies was to have everybody with a weapon pointed straight up if there were an air attack, and that might have been what we were seeing, or at least hearing some evidence of a few hours ago. It feels better here. It feels a little more comfortable, a lot more comfortable, in fact, than it did when we were lying on the floor and feeling these blasts.
I think I've been awake for, what, about 30 hours? How long have you been awake?
At least that long. A long time, Bernie. And the adrenaline's beginning to go down. You know, that rush after rush after rush is kind of working its way out of our bodies, I think. Both of us look almost like zombies. But
well, we feel like zombies, let's just hope that our minds will continue to serve us and our senses and our abilities to continue reporting to the world what it is we are experiencing and seeing here. I just hope, I've said it once before, I just hope that as morning unfolds, we'll be able to find and talk with and listen to some responsible officials from Saddam Hussein's government. Right now, everybody continues to hunker down. Let me turn the switch off to see whether Lou has something for us.
All right, I will do that, Bernie. And I'll tell you one more thing, Lou, before we do that. We made a great deal of videotape. I mean, there's going to be some fascinating pictures which we took out the windows of our hotel. The Iraqi officials came up after the attack, confiscated them. We hope they will give them back. They said they'd give them back to us after daylight, and we'll just see if we can show those to you later in the day. Lou?
All right, gentlemen, you're sounding tired. Take a little rest. We'll be...
All right, we're doing some job over there. Coran?
And John, Brian Wilson's been at the Pentagon all night, where Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, of course, as you know, gave a speech not long ago telling reporters that things are going well out there. Maybe we can get an idea. Is there any idea as far as casualties yet? Have you heard?
Coran, they're not giving us that information just yet. They want to be sure they come to us with accurate information. And remember, the pilots have hardly even had time to return to their bases. So there is no time, and since it was an airstrike, that would be the likely casualties if there are any. So until they get a count of the planes and count of the people and get firm, accurate numbers, they don't want to give us that information. But I must stress that Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was very encouraged by the initial reports he had received here at the Pentagon. He said that according to the Secretary of Defense that the bombardment and attacks began around 6 p.m. and involved hundreds of flights from U.S., U.K., Saudi, and Kuwaiti air forces. He said there was no real Iraqi air retaliation. He was a bit surprised by that. Went on to say that apparently they accomplished a fairly high degree of tactical surprise. Here's just a few of the comments we had earlier during the Pentagon briefing.
The best reporting that I've seen on what transpired in Baghdad was on CNN. And it would appear, based upon the comments that were coming in from the CNN crew in the hotel in Baghdad, that the operation was successful in striking targets with a high degree of precision. At least that's the reporting according to CNN.
So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
There were reports from the region that the Iraqis were able to fire off a few of their missiles. We heard some reports as many as 5 missiles might have been fired. But officials here at the Pentagon and Secretary of Defense Cheney himself said to his knowledge those reports are false. It does appear there was a high degree of tactical surprise, and the Iraqis did not have time to fuel and launch those missiles. We are not expecting any further statements from the Pentagon people here tonight. The next briefing is scheduled for sometime tomorrow. Coran?
Thank you very much, Brian, for that report.
All right. There is another report from Saudi Arabia that an oil field there has been hit by one of those missiles. Now, again, we don't know how true that is. It's a very early report. If it did happen, we don't know how serious it is. But that's a report from there. The other report out of from Israel is that the missiles that were aimed at Israel in western Iraq, the ones closest to Israel that they were so concerned about, have also been wiped out. There was also another report that every single one of our planes in that first attack against Iraq and Kuwait, every one of them has returned back safely. Dr. Mehdi, we were talking earlier about the possibility of Mr. Hussein surrendering. Now you know this man, you've met this man. Do you believe he would ever surrender?
No, his psychology presently is so stubborn that what is he going to lose? Only his life, at worst. And it is better to die as a brave man than to surrender to the foreign powers.
Well, he goes right to Allah, into the arms of Allah, right? If he dies a brave man?
If it is not to Allah, at least he will be considered a martyr, and he will go in the hearts of millions of Arabs, Muslims, the third world people, as a tall man who stood against Western colonialism.
Now, you say he wants to die a martyr, but how about his troops? How faithful do you think his troops are to him?
I think by now they are psyched enough to support him. They don't want to die any more than the American soldiers want to. And as I stated earlier, I hope that the Iraqi soldiers and government will not retaliate, and their retaliation will not be successful. I hope that their retaliation will not be successful to decrease the death, both of the Americans and of the Iraqis.
What happens if and when, let's say when Saddam Hussein is no longer running Iraq, or one way or the other? What happens then to the as far as leadership in that country? Do you have any idea?
John, it is really presently not only the problem of Iraq. America today is involved in the whole of the Muslim world. Tomorrow, if we receive reports that the American embassies in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in Morocco were attacked, let us not be astonished. It is not an Iraqi problem, and I suggest that it is easy to enter into war, difficult to get out of it, and America will have at least 50 more years of involvement as the result of the decision tonight.
Thank you very much. Just stand by, because right now we want to go to a family in Valley Stream, Long Island, is listening to the news of the war very closely. One of their loved ones is right in the middle of it all. Bob O'Brien is standing by with more for us. Bob?
Well, Coran, we are in the Valley Stream home of Major Kenneth Stock, who is an Army Reserve Major, along with his entire family, his wife Bonnie, his 6-year-old son Andrew, and I think we still have 2-year-old Emily partially awake over there in the arms of Ken Stock's mother Helen, and Mrs. Stock's mother Carol Hubble is here also. They all came here together today, somehow feeling that something was going to happen. And then tonight, about 4 hours ago, of course, as the rest of the world found out, they found out. But it's in homes like this where they have loved ones who are over there that rapt attention is being paid to every piece of information that is now coming out of the what is now a war zone. Bonnie, as you heard the news that it really had started, the shooting had begun, what went through your mind?
I guess I was just in shock, but I also realized that this was going to happen. I just knew when I got up this morning that there would be news by the time I went to bed that there would be a war.
Is it any way is that a relief to you in any way? That it's finally started? And I mean, what was worse, the waiting or hearing that it's finally started?
It's really hard to say. I really felt until the very last minute that perhaps there would be a diplomatic solution. I can't really say that I'm relieved, no. It's still hard because it's still going to be waiting day after day to find out what happens, and I'm concerned about all of the soldiers there, not only my husband.
And what did you think about what President Bush had to say tonight about why we did this and what we are now doing?
I think he seemed confident, and he was certainly sure that he had exhausted all of the possibilities of diplomacy. I guess this was the only course of action that he should take.
And when he said that this is not going to be a war like Vietnam, where the people fighting this war will not have one hand tied behind their back, what do you think about that?
Well, that heartens me a little bit. I think it helps me feel better about it. During Vietnam, of course, there was so much resistance, and it was like we were the enemy. And I don't get the feeling in that. I think there's a lot more support for us.
Well, now, we have, you talked to your husband on Friday, and even Landrew here got to talk to your daddy, didn't you? What, if you could talk to your daddy right now, Andrew, what would you tell him?
I love you.
Good words and good feelings to be sending over to the war zone from the family of one of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are over there. So, reporting live from the home of Major Kenneth Stock in Valley Stream, Long Island. Bob O'Brien, Fox News Channel 5. Back to you.
All right, Bob. We're going to go to the White House now, and Patrick McGrath is still there. Patrick, are you there?
Yes, I am, John.
What, anything going on there now? Earlier this evening, the consensus seemed to be that President Bush seemed very, very calm, very much in control, very serene, at peace with himself. What's happening there now?
Well, our latest report, John, is that President Bush has now left the Oval Office, where apparently he had a brief meeting with evangelist Billy Graham. Perhaps that calmed him some for the night. It is going to be a long night for President Bush.
We are hearing that he will be woken up from time to be informed of the progress of the battle. And those reports should be coming in with great regularity because it is now daylight in Iraq and Kuwait. So the spy planes, the reconnaissance satellites will be sending back photographs to just give us some idea of the extent of the damage that was done by U.S. air power. The encouraging thing tonight, of course, is that from all indications, there was no Iraqi resistance in the air. We heard a lot about the anti-aircraft fire on the ground, and we don't know how effective that was at knocking down planes, but at least they met no resistance from Iraqi missiles and from Iraqi planes. So that bodes very well for the future if that is true, because it may mean that the U.S. will be able to continue an air war campaign with much less danger than before, and hopefully they'll be able to continue to be effective and not have to go to a ground war, because the ground war is where all the casualties are. And casualties, unfortunately, are the one thing we haven't heard much about, although Secretary Cheney at the Pentagon said initial reports are encouraging about casualties. So while we really don't know overall how successful this has been tonight, the initial information is very encouraging. The President's got to feel pretty good about things, but he still needs a lot more information to get a really solid night's sleep. John?
Patrick, we keep hearing from President Bush and other members of the administration that this will not be another Vietnam. Now, how much concern is there in the White House that because of what happened to us in Vietnam, that our country has lost a lot of its will, a lot of its resolve to get involved in any sort of an armed conflict, whether it's justified or not?
Well, I don't think it'll be a Vietnam because we don't really have any designs to take over territory of Iraq. We just want to get Iraq out of Kuwait, and I think that can be done. And all indications are it can probably be done without a ground war. I don't think we are going to go in there and fight in the trenches and take a lot of casualties. I think we're going to bomb the supply lines now with our apparent control of the air and let them sit there until they've had enough. I mean, we could go back to sanctions and keep the pressure on. So I think in that sense, it is not likely to be a Vietnam. We're not fighting in the jungle house to house. There's no ideology involved here. I think eventually it seems pretty clear we're going to win that battle in Kuwait, that the Iraqis will get out, and then it will be over, and we can leave. We don't have to pacify as we did in South Vietnam, have to win the hearts and minds of the people. We're not trying to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people per se. We're just trying to get Iraq to stop the notion that they can go across borders with their armed force and attack another country. And that's a much different proposition, and that's the sort of thing that a military might can be effective with. The thing that is not clear at all, though, is what will the Arab attitude be when this is all over? Assuming we do win it, and assuming it's not a Vietnam and it doesn't go on forever, what will the Arab feeling be there? Will we have generations of Arab enmity and the terrorism that goes with it? Or will many of the Arabs recognize upon reflection that, yes, Saddam Hussein was wrong, it was aggression, and that the U.S., presumably after winning, then got out? So it is not at all clear how this is going to play out, and for that matter, it's not clear how long the battle is going to go on. Marlon Fitzwater said earlier, this is really the beginning of some long days and nights. So they are not hyping this. They're not going out there tonight saying the battle is won, victory is in our grasp. They're being very careful not to get expectations too high. But it's clear that their initial impression, particularly Secretary of Defense Cheney, that they're very encouraged with the way things are going.
Patrick, thank you. Go ahead.
All around the city, the war is what everybody is talking about, especially people with ties to Arab countries and to Israel. Jeff Weiser has a report for us now.
Tonight, the Persian Gulf War was felt in some heavily ethnic neighborhoods of Brooklyn. This is Atlantic Avenue, where many Arab Americans live. At the Syrian-American-owned grocery, store employees were engaged in animated discussions once they'd heard that the shooting had begun overseas. Some told me they support the president's actions because they are patriotic Americans. Down the street, at the Tripoli restaurant, the news of war came on the telephone, and it was decided to close up shop. Virtually all of Shaheen Abbas' family lives in Lebanon. He was almost speechless.
So why are you closing? Because of the war? How do you feel about it?
You know, I don't feel very well. You know, I'm very upset because nobody knows, what it's going to be
really, it's a difficult situation, and it's very terrible.
At this Syrian-American store, Sam Mustafa was deeply concerned.
As an Arab, I'm always concerned about what happened overseas.
Do you think this is the right or the wrong course for America to be taking right now?
Well, we would much rather have them wait it out with a sanction and not to have any bloodshed on either side, really, because the outcome is up in the air. You don't know what the reaction going to be. You don't know the casualties.
You enter another world just a few miles away in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, home for many ultra-Orthodox Jews. Here there's no hedging when you mention the name Saddam Hussein.
I think they should bomb him to hell.
Why?
Why? Because it should not wait to be bombed by them.
Are you not afraid of Israel being attacked?
Well, I hope they won't be attacked. If America took the offensive, I hope they can stop them. They should be able to get off the ground to strike.
It's a good idea, I guess.
Why?
To get rid of a tyrant.
Why do you think he's so bad?
He's, number one, he annexed a country which was a lawful, legal country. He used in Iran ammunition and chemical warfare, which was not allowed by the UN Charter.
I think it should be, because if not, in a year from now, he may have the atom. He could destroy the whole world, because he's not the person. He's not somebody he doesn't have human in himself.
So there you have it. New York City is certainly a city of many opinions. From Williamsburg, Brooklyn, this is Jeff Weiser, Fox News, Channel 5.
And Shula Bahat has joined us now. She's with the American Jewish Committee. She, when she lived in Israel, she was a captain in the Israeli army.
That's right.
You told me, Shula, that you spoke with your family about 6:45 tonight, about 15 minutes or so before
That's right. I was
started.
able to reach them at 6:45 today, just
and
before I
what did they
heard.
have to say?
Well, they were calm, resolute, determined, very concerned because of the unknown. I'm sure by now they're much more relieved, because I know that they have the news of the H3 and H2 destruction. But I think that the Israelis in a situation of that nature usually somehow come together and have a certain esprit de corps, a certain morale that holds the country together. Very concerned, particularly because of the fear of chemical weapons for Jews, for Israelis, many of whom are survivors or children of survivors of the Holocaust. The idea of a chemical weapon
of gas,
is bone chilling, but I'm sure they are a little bit more relieved now. Although it's not over, I'm sure they are a little bit more relieved now.
Now, as a former member of the army there, do you think that the Israeli army, the Israeli Air Force, is just chomping at the bit to get into this fight, but knows that from a political standpoint that would be unwise?
I hope not, because after all, this is not a war involving Israel. Saddam Hussein did not conquer Kuwait because of Israel. He had his own economic and political reasons. He's trying to involve Israel. And Israel said only if Saddam Hussein will strike it, it will defend itself as it has the right to do. But this war really has nothing to do with Israel.
Well, he did say that he invaded Kuwait for the Palestinian cause.
Well, he said it only after a week, when he saw the reaction of the entire world community to his terrible aggression. He invented this in order to break up the coalition that the American administration was able to put together, in order particularly to break up the Arab coalition against him. But we all know that this is not the case.
What was your reaction and your friends in Israel, your family's reaction, when Hussein said that he did this to help the Palestinian cause?
We know him, we know the Middle East, we know that the Arab Middle East is full of extremism, of violence. We were not surprised of his the way he conquered and destroyed Kuwait. He has a certain record against his own people, Iran. So I don't think there was much surprise. Needless to say, Israel destroyed in 1982 his nuclear capacity at the time, and I'm sure the world now owes gratitude to Israel for that, because the war would have been rather different if he would have the capacity.
There was at the time, I know, an awful lot of criticism here in this country against that bombing, but I don't hear any of those same people saying, we've made a mistake, thank you very much.
Well, Well, I'm sure it will be said. I'm sure it is said behind the scenes.
Don't be so sure. A lot of these people who criticized back then, I don't think have the courage to admit that perhaps Israel, in fact, did do the right thing. I want to go to Corinne now because she has another guest. Corinne?
John,